Here we go, going live.
What to do to make all my Lunker Lake dreams come true.
Hello everybody, Bob Lusk, the Pond Boss, checking in from the balmy, cool hills of North Texas, right here in the safe confines of Pond Boss World Headquarters. Glad to see everybody. Who's going to be first to check in? It's almost always Jason Nepstead, which I bet he'll be the first one tonight too. Got a pretty good show lined up for you, although I'm not sure what I'm going to talk about. So, no, I do. I kind of got an idea. There's Ron checking in, Ron Ardoin from South Louisiana. I'll be seeing you before long. Hey, there's Mark Dauber. Mark Dauber had a birthday not long ago, if I remember right. Mark's hanging out in Montgomery, south of Montgomery, Pensacola, Alabama. There's Jason checking in. I see that. Ron's in South Louisiana. Jason's over in North Cackalack, North Carolina. What I thought I'd do today is talk a little bit about some of the things I've been doing lately. In the last few days, man, I've done some pretty cool stuff. And I thought it would be entertaining to share some of those things with you guys today. As you know, you guys know what to do. Hashtag Pond Boss Magazine. Click like. Hashtag Pond Boss Magazine in the whatever comment section. Click like. Share this video to your timeline. You'll be eligible for a drawing for a Pond Boss hat and a Pond Boss mug that knows how to keep hot things hot and cold things cold. Pond Boss Magazine, $35 a year. There it is right there. $35 a year. The March-April issue should be in the mail stream by now. I haven't seen it yet. I can't wait to. I'm looking forward to it. So, I see Fred Bingham's checking in. Michael Eric's checking in from Iowa. Fred Bingham's there in Brownstown, Illinois. I got your text. I was on an airplane and I tried to play catch up today. So I'll be hollering back at you, Fred, and talk to you. So let's see here. Oh, there I think I see it. There it is. Holy cow, found it. Here we are. All right. Christopher Aguilard's on board, looks like. Zach Vaughn, Mike Cottrell, Brian Lawrence, Matt Hines. Hey guys, how are you? Roger B. Peterson. Good to see you guys. Hope I'm looking at the right one. Yeah, I know I am. Yep, it's this shirt. Woo, here we go. So, man, I really got to do some fun things. John Funk says that it's almost spring there in mid-Michigan. John Wilson, good to see you, John. Are you still at spring training, hanging out at baseball camp? Man, I tell you what, you are a social butterfly. Every time I look around, you're somewhere cool. And it ain't always the same place. That's neat. That's cool. When a guy gets a chance to do it, man, do it. Gary Hempel, I see Gary in there. Let's see who else we got here. Chad Bowman. Pond is filling in Eastland County. You know, we've been having a little bit of rain, and Eastland County is not known for all of its rain, but good to see you got going on. John Wilson. Let's see. John already said hi to John. Let's see if there's somebody else. Good evening. Yes, got it. Bill Russell. Good to see you. So last Friday, I had a pretty cool day, and then Saturday I caught a plane and shot up to upstate New York and spent some time at a property in upstate New York, and then some time in right around Scranton, Carbondale, Pennsylvania. And I'll tell you about that here in a minute. It's pretty cool. Bob Vigenis. Oh boy, Bob, man, I know I'm going to butcher your name, but I got you. Ready for the spawn. I'm always ready for a spawn. Won't be long. I talked to Tim Stewart today. There's Josie. I'm fixing to talk about you, Josie. You and Wayne. Hola, she says. Hello to you. Debbie hasn't popped open that bottle of wine yet, but it's on the list. We got to enjoy that salsa you gave us yesterday. That was fun. So last Friday, I got to do some fun stuff, and I thought I'd share some of that because it's good practical information that you guys can use. And before I go on, Josephine Lancaster and her husband Wayne, this is entertaining to me. I think it's cute as heck. But Wayne travels a fair amount, and when he's not at home on a Wednesday, they have their date night where each of them gets their iPad. This is funny. And they watch me in separate cities with a cocktail or something to munch on, and they text each other on their phones, asking questions and going back and forth. Well, last Wednesday, you might remember, I was talking about going to analyze some ponds on Friday. And I made the comment that there's one over in central Texas, probably 4 acres, and we were going to climb in a boat and go look around. Well, I had looked on Google Earth, and there was a boat shoved up on the shore of this pond that belongs to Wayne and Josie. And when I made that comment, Wayne picked up on it, and he started texting back and forth with Josie. And then after the show, they had a phone conversation and said, I think the pond boss is expecting to be in a boat. We don't have one. Well, so that boat that I saw on Google Earth was gone. So he said, you need to go get a boat. Well, so Josie's telling me this story, and I'm laughing my butt off listening to the story. So Thursday morning last week, Josie went to Bass Pro Shops, bought a boat, trolling motor, PFDs, battery, even a fishing pole for her lovely husband, and had all that waiting when I got there. Now, what my plan was I was going to talk with her on Thursday, which we did. And if they didn't have a boat, I was going to have one of the guys bring one and meet me or something like that. But Wayne and Josie went and bought a boat, which they needed it anyway. So that's kind of a cool story. Let's see, Ron asking a question. He says, is a goggle eye or warmouth a natural cross between a green sunfish and a brim? No, it's not. A goggle eye, which is also called a chinky pin perch in your part of the country, is not a cross. It's a species. It's just like any other species of sunfish. A bluegill is a bluegill, a red ear is a red ear, a pumpkin seed is a pumpkin seed. Those are all separate species. A goggle eye or warmouth is its own species. Goggle eye are native in slow-moving streams, rivers, not as much in ponds and lakes. And if you do, when you do see one in a pond or lake, odds are high that it swam in from a stream somewhere. And when they do show up in ponds, they're kind of a brownish colored fish with a pretty big mouth, but there's not very many of them. They don't spawn but maybe once a year, and they spawn a little bit later than bluegills do, so their baby survival rate's pretty low. Let's see, Josie's saying can't disappoint the pond boss. That's pretty funny. I'm still laughing about that. Tim Stewart, you got Bible study tonight? Well, it is Wednesday, and we're studying from a little different Bible. Yours is more important, so catch up with you later, man. Mike DeMint, good to see you, Mike. Mike's coming to the next Institute of Higher Pondology, which I want to talk about a little bit. I got an email from one of the guys today, and he's a little concerned about flying and with this coronavirus scare, so we're going to visit with him. He's coming from Washington, so I do want to visit with him about it. Let's see, Frank James. Oh, by the way, Frank, listen to this. Hold up. Freeze. Pond Boss Magazine, $35 a year. If you haven't subscribed to Pond Boss yet, please do. Please do. If you'll do the hashtag Pond Boss Magazine in the comments section, click like and share this to your timeline, you're eligible for a drawing. You're drawing for a hat and this mug. And guess who the winner is? Frank James. Woohoo! I'm glad you're here, man. Leanne drew your name today and handed me a little slip of paper. So there'll be a Pond Boss mug and probably an ink pen and a hat coming your way here in a few days. But so here's what Frank James is asking. Hey, Bob, in view of our constant fight against fish-stealing cormorants, would it be smart to either dye the water or fertilize heavily to reduce visibility? Would the dirty birds pass up on a pond like that and go to a clear body of water? Does the murk hinder cormorants' efforts to get to the fish? No, it doesn't. It just hinders their success. They're still going to... I was at a pond today where the water's got a little turbidity, and there was a scout bird right there. And I guarantee you, if there was a fish, that cormorant would have caught it. They don't... Gary Hempel, I love that. Okay, holy cow, we got a little love affair going on here. Drew Hayes checking in. But no, the dye won't help. The things that do help are places for fish to hide, like your structure and your cover. If the fish can get in there, the way cormorants do, and I'll tell you a couple of true stories. Cormorant numbers plummeted back in the 60s and 70s because of the use of DDT on farm crops. So DDT would get in the water, fish would absorb it, cormorants would swallow the fish, and the only way it could excrete DDT was through its eggs. Well, the DDT made the eggshells soft and pliable so they couldn't hatch. So cormorant numbers plummeted. They were placed on the endangered species list, and to this day they're protected. But when DDT was banned, back in the late 60s, I think it was the cormorant birds started coming back. And by 82 or 83, their numbers were really getting high. And I didn't really know much about them. I'd been in business 2 or 3 years, and I saw this cormorant dive down in a hatchery pond down south of Houston at Danbury. And I saw it go down, and saw it come back up. I could not believe what my eyes saw. I saw this giant bass in the mouth of that bird. The bird flipped it up, turned it sideways, and swallowed it head first. Well, I got a shotgun, and I shot that bird, which, I mean, it was against the law, but maybe they can't do anything about it 40 years later. So anyway, I got it. By the time I shot it and it floated close enough to the shore that I could get it, was about half an hour. And I pulled that bird off after it blew to the shore and laid it on my tailgate, got a pocket knife, and cut that bird open. And that bass fell out, and I reeled back. Oh my gosh, that thing was covered in slippery, slimy little worms, little white worms all over it. The eyes were digested, the scales were coming loose, some of the fins had already been digested. So that's when I learned that there's a symbiotic relationship between parasites and cormorants. So the worms actually do the digesting. Well, I weighed and measured that fish. It was 15 inches long, weighed 1 pound, 7 ounces. So cormorants can wreak havoc, and they will. Now, if the water's turbid where they can't see as well, they're not going to eat as many fish because they're going to have a harder time catching them. But what they do when they send a scout bird, if there's a source, if there's enough fish in there to go get the flock, the scout bird goes back and brings the whole flock. And then the flock acts like cattle dogs and starts herding those fish. And what they'll do is they'll dive underwater and they'll use their wings to propel themselves, and their tail is a rudder, and they can swim with their feet. There was I'll never forget, I live near Lake Texoma. An angler caught a cormorant on a jug line on a green sunfish for bait 45 feet deep. So that bird swam 45 feet deep, ate that brim, got hooked, and drowned. So I've literally sit on the shore and watched cormorants herd fish at a fish hatchery. There was a bunch of blue cat in a pretty nice hatchery pond, and these cormorants herded those fish. And there were 30 birds, but all I ever saw at one time were 10 because the other 20 were under there swimming in unison, shoving those fish up so they could eat them. And there were several times that swarms or schools of fish would swim out on the bank trying to get away from those birds. So they can be devastating. Is a water turkey and a cormorant the same bird? Asked Chris Horsley. Yes, they are. Water turkey, cormorant are the same bird. Let's see. I like what Gary Hempel says. A 12 gauge works. You know what I tell people is I can't tell people to shoot them because it's against the law. Now, there was a time you could get a permit, and I expect a depredation permit, and I expect that's going to happen again. So in the meantime, I encourage people to discourage the birds from being on your property. So you need to study about how to do that. You know, I would love to assist in their suicide if there was a way. But Scott McClurk says, hi, Bob. Do you want to talk about starting up aerators for the season, temperatures, and should you step up their use, etc.? Sure, I'll talk about that, Scott. Scott's in Nebraska. There's Matt Marsden. Matt Marsden is American Fish Tree. He manufactures artificial fish habitat. Friend Matt Marsden, and then he'll send you to his website, and you can see all the things that he does. He's got some really, really cool underwater artificial fish habitat. I see he just joined in. You guys click on his link, click on his name, and go to his American Fish Tree website, and you can see what he does. So to answer Scott's question, starting up aeration systems, I like the water temperature to be close to 55 and then crank it on. Now, almost everyone, Gary Hempel, loud noise like a political debate. There's too much chatter in a political debate. You want to commit suicide when you're listening to that if you're a water turkey. So to start up your aeration system, start it at about 55 degrees, and when you kick it on, get downwind and see if you can smell anything. Because if you're kicking up any stagnant water, which this time of year you should not be, Your water should be pretty autonomous in terms of oxygen and temperature, top to bottom. See if you can smell anything. If you smell a musty smell or a rotten egg smell or a sulfury smell, then only run it for about 20 or 30 minutes, then turn it off. So when you start up, typically what a manufacturer tells you to do is start your system, your aeration system, at about 15 minutes the first day, 30 minutes the next day, an hour the next day, 2 hours the next day, 4 hours, on and on and on until you're going 24/7, and leave it running 24/7 until you get to the hottest weather of the year. Now, those of you south of the Mason-Dixon line, especially in the south, southeast, and southwest, what I tell people is by the time we hit late June, early July, cut your aeration systems back to run from 9 at night till 9 in the morning. One way to know that is to check your water temperatures. Don't let your water temperature get above about 83 degrees top to bottom with aeration. If that's the case, get your aerator up off the bottom, or not off the bottom, but in shallower water. If you got 15 feet of water, set your aerations diffusers at about 10 or 12 feet. Leave a little bit of cool water down there for a cool water refuge. Harrison Davis, good evening. Good to see you, man. There's David Figgs checking in. Hey, David, good to see you. Tom Davis from Ohio. David is in Georgia. Let's see here. Brian Lawrence says there's a comment period going on now for permits to shoot cormorants. That's exactly right. If you want to know more about that, spend a little time on Stephen Barden, his Facebook page, and visit with Stephen Barden. He's Texas Lake Pro Management over in Comanche, Texas, in that area. He's a top flight, all-star fisheries biologist, young guy coming up that's just he's gold. He's gold. And he is spearheading some of that comment circumstances, chances for you to talk about cormorants if you've got some. So Ron says, I know there's two parts of fertilization, but I'm still a little confused about the zooplankton. The zooplankton are the microscopic animal parts, and the phytoplankton are the plant parts that photosynthesize and turn the water green. But are the zooplankton already present in the water before fertilization, and do they just benefit on the phytoplankton as phytoplankton photosynthesizes and grows, turning the water green? Okay. All right, let me tell you how that works. When you fertilize the water, you're putting nutrients in the water column itself. And when you do that, Ron says he hit the send button a little too soon. Bob Wusher's checking in. Ed Spinopoulos is checking in. Hey, Ed. Ed's a fisheries biologist. He's up in the northern tier of states. He operates in several states. Bob Wusher works with Purina Mills. Bob is in Plano, Texas, and he is one of the experts with Wildlife Feed and with Purina's Aquamax line as well. So good to see him. So to answer Ron's question, okay, when you fertilize in the fertilization is all about timing. You gotta have the right timing, which is when the water temperature is in the upper 50s and going up, and the clarity is high. Clarity is high means 30 inches, greater than 30 inches. If your visibility is greater than 30 inches, think about fertilization. So what happens when the water is fertilized, you're introducing 4 or 5 pounds of phosphorus per surface acre of water with a little bit of nitrogen and no potassium. That fertilizer's got to be dissolved into the water. Now, some ponds are naturally fertile already, but if you do fertilize, use a pond fertilizer and follow the label direction, checking visibility before and then during. When I say during, that means several days after you put the fertilizer in the water. So what the fertilizer does is, just like in the garden or on trees or whatever, it's going to promote the growth of plankton, which are plants, which in a pond, plankton is microscopic single-cell algae. That's what it is. Well, the zooplankton, the little bitty amoebas and parameciums and things like that, those little animals are there, but they're only there in proportion to the amount of food they've got. So when you add food in terms of microscopic algae, so the phytoplankton, as that volume increases, that provides food so that the zooplankton can reproduce exponentially as well, which they'll do. And as the zooplankton grows, then there's consumers of that, which would be like Daphnia, water fleas, bugs and things that your tiny fish eat. So that's how that works. And the way you do it is you measure visibility so that you can know how clear the water is. You're really shooting for 18 to 30 inches of visibility by the 1st of May, depending on where you are in the country. When your water temperature is 65 degrees to 68 degrees, fish babies are coming off the nest and they're ready to eat. So that's when that's your target date, target time to have the water fertile enough that you have enough food to feed those babies. Now you got to remember, with every food chain, I don't care whether you're at the very base with phytoplankton or zooplankton or insects or small fish or bigger fish or giant fish, in that pyramid, it's going to be dynamic. It's going to ebb and flow. Zooplankton can overeat the phytoplankton. And here's how you know that's happening. The water starts off about I'm going to call it pea soup green. Then as the zooplankton start to gain a foothold, the water color shifts. It shifts from that lighter green to more of a darker green, almost an olive color. Then as the zooplankton begin to dominate, it becomes an olive brown, then a brownish olive, and then brown, and then clear. And when it turns clear, that means the zooplankton have overeaten their food chain and they die. So what some folks will do by continuing to monitor the visibility is to add just a little bit nudge of fertilizer, like late May or early June, to perpetuate that phytoplankton bloom. So there's kind of a long answer for a really good question. That was a good question. Harrison Davis, good afternoon. Let's see here. Mark Dauber over Pent Lyle, Alabama, plus or minus 5 acre pond, no visible vegetation. Is that why we just seem to have no bullfrogs? No, that's not. The reason you don't have any bullfrogs is because you have fish that eat the bullfrogs. Here's the thing about bullfrogs. First of all, their tadpoles take 2 years to mature into frogs. And so when they finally mature into frogs, they're mobile. They come out on the shore. Herons will eat them. Raccoons will eat them. Owl will eat them. Fish will eat them. So if they don't have some good, safe places right around the shoreline where they can escape, something's going to eat them. And if they run out of food, they leave. So they can migrate. So having bullfrogs is basically a function of having a pond that's relatively small, that's overgrown, with no fish. That's kind of the recipe. Or if you've got a bigger body of water, then there's some shallow areas with enough escape cover that the frogs can escape. The problem is they don't know they have to. You know, by the time something walks up on them and they jump, sometimes it's too late. And the thing about a frog, I've watched this happen. I have watched a house cat, sneak up on a frog, it jump in the water, and as soon as it hits the water, a bass eats it. You know, so the odds are stacked against it. You know, I really thought I was going to be talking about what happened over the weekend, but holy cow, at 6:53. Let me do a real quick commercial. Okay, Bob, this is Jason in North Carolina in the Facebook jail again. You know, I don't ever read your posts, but I kind of want to now, Jason. Jason, I think, I don't know what you did there. What's the best time to plant some new eelgrass? I'll tell you what, you need to plant that eelgrass when you can get it. That's what you need to do. Plant it when you can get it, which, you know, you could do that right now if you can get it. So, because what you're going to do is plant the tubers anyway. It's kind of like planting daffodils or irises or things like that. You're going to plant the tuber, and you can do that right now if you want. There's Chris Blood. I was going to do a commercial, Chris. Glad to see Chris. Chris works with Texas Hunter Feeders, and Texas Hunter Feeders is one of our sponsors of this show and Pond Boss Magazine. And I tell you what, Chris, I love Texas Hunter. Texas Hunter has by far got the best feeders out there. Great customer service. I've got several feeders, those feeders myself, feeding our fish at Lusk Lodge Comatue. And because of Texas Hunter providing those products, we've got something else, another tool we can use to grow giant fish. And feeding fish is a smart thing to do if you want to expedite growth rates and grow bigger fish. Texas Hunter is a go-to. Now, feed Purina's MVP or one of the parts of the lines of Aquamax feeds, make those fish grow big. The thing I love about Purina Mills is they've done the research and they've come up with a product line to give us a feeding program. If we want to feed little bitty bluegills, we can do that. If we want to feed giant feed-trained largemouth bass, we can do that. So there are products in that Aquamax line of feeds that will feed any fish that you want to grow that will eat fish food. That includes channel catfish, tilapia, feed-trained largemouth bass, bluegill, golden shiners, fathead minnows, tilapia, hybrid striped bass. The handful of fish that won't eat fish food are red ear sunfish, non-feed-trained largemouth bass, crappie. Fish like that tend to not eat fish food, but a lot of them will. So here we go. Lance Fredrickson. Hey, sir, muddy water problem. Limed it, and the pH alkalinity are good. Thoughts on why it's still murky? There's two reasons ponds get murky there, Lance. Ponds are murky because of suspended clay soil particles, microscopic colloidal clay, or something is physically stirring up the water. That's what it is. So either way, if it's something stirring the water, you eliminate that source and the mud will settle out. Here's what you do. Get a jar, like a big mayonnaise jar, a 1 gallon glass pickle jar, fill it full of water, set it on a shelf in the garage and give it a week. And then go see if the water's clear. If the mud is settled out and it's laying on the bottom and it's just gin clear, you're good to go. It's because something's stirring the water up. It might be cattle, it might be fish, it might be wind and wave action. 99 times out of 100, that ain't it. It's because the clay is suspended. So either you've got some exposed dirt or the pond bottom has got colloidal clay, which that happens often, depending where you are. But when that clay is suspended, you've got to figure out a way to take those little bitty microscopic pieces of clay, cling together. You can use either gypsum or you can use alum. On a rare occasion, calcium carbonate limestone will work, but sometimes it won't. In that case, it's gypsum or alum. Now, you can use gypsum yourself because you're not going to overdo that. With alum, you can kill every fish you've got. So I think the smartest way to do it is get a jar of that water, and if it doesn't settle out, go get some gypsum, calcium sulfates, what sheetrock is made out of, and put half a teaspoon in the water, mixed in the water, and see if that helps the water settle out. And then you can extrapolate how many teaspoons or half teaspoons that you're going to need in your pond based on its volume. Now, I'm talking fast and it sounds easy. It's a little harder than what I'm talking. So let's see here. Drew Hay, Texas Hunter is awesome. Yes, they are. Tate Smith, hello from North Mississippi. I'm still battling ruds. Wife caught 200 in the last couple of days. Ruds look like golden shiners, but their fins are red and they get a lot bigger than golden shiners. The thing about ruds is they're native to Great Britain, and they were brought over here in the 80s as a bait fish to sell for bass fishermen. Bass anglers were clamoring for bigger live bait, and ruds came over. Ruds are, when you look at one, you're confident it's a golden shiner, but it's not. It's an invasive species. It displaces native species, and one of the best ways to battle ruds is to put some bass in there that can eat them. Bass will eat them. They're in Richmond Mill Lake, which they've been in there probably for 40 years, and the bass love them, but they can't get ahead of them. Even though we had Richmond Mill Lake at one point overstocked with largemouth bass, they could not get ahead of the ruds. So the ruds are pretty resilient. Now, I don't want anybody stocking them, and there are no sources to buy them. They are where they are, and we're going to be living with them for a long, long time because they're an invasive, exotic species. That's the drill. So last Friday, anyway, my first stop was a 500-plus acre ranch in Central Texas, west of Corsicana, recently bought by a longtime high school friend of mine. And he had called me and said, hey, you know what? I'd like for you to come and take a look. Well, he's got a flood control lake that's about 8 or 10 acres. And back in the 50s, up until about 1974, the federal government built literally hundreds and hundreds of these flood prevention lakes. So a flood prevention lake back then was built and designed to capture floods that maybe were 50-year floods, impound that water, and then release it over a period of 4 or 5 days. But the main reason it happened, there were several cities. Fort Worth was one of them, Fort Worth, Texas, in the late 40s, where the Trinity River rose up to the 7th floor of the Montgomery Wards building. Well, when it's going up to the 7th floor of buildings in the United States, people don't like that. So all these big FP sites, flood prevention sites, were built. Well, here's the way those work. They just build the dam high with a lot of freeboard between the overflow and the top of the dam, big enough that it can capture all the water coming down in that watershed during a massive rainstorm. So all it is it's a big empty bowl. Well, those lakes were designed for a 50-year lifespan. So let's see, we're 50 years from that. So all these lakes have lived their lifespan. The majority of them are silted in. They're not good fishing lakes. And my friend Mark wanted to see if he could come up with a way to manage it as a fishery and not spend waste a bunch of money. So what I explained to him was, if you want to dredge a lake like that, the dirt's got to be moved 3 times. The first time is you got to get it out. Then you haul it somewhere and you pile it up. And then after it dries enough, you spread it out. So moving dirt 3 times, get it out, move it to pile it, spread it out. You're moving it 3 times. It's 3 times the cost. So when I explained to him that it would take about $300,000 to renovate that lake significantly enough to make it a better fishing lake for largemouth bass, or we could go up onto in the watershed a few hundred yards and build an 8-acre lake that's almost as big or maybe even a little bit bigger than that flood prevention lake for about $100,000. Oh, well, he hadn't thought about that yet because you don't know what you don't know. So I told him I'd write some things up and let him know about it, but that's what I'm going to tell him. Now, he's got several smaller ponds. Every one of the smaller ponds on that ranch, they've been neglected probably for 25 years. Every one of the smaller ponds, the dams have been breached. And they've been breached because of beaver or nutria or both. Otters made slides over the top of the dam and cut the dam down just low enough that when it rained, the water could go over that slide and open up the dam. So over a period of probably 10 years, the water has eroded the middle of the dam. So he's saying, well, can I just put some fish in there? Well, sure you can, but you've still got a lake with a broken dam. So the proper way to handle that is to figure out how you want to manage the infrastructure. So, and he just so happens he bought a bulldozer because he likes to escape his work and go push down mesquite trees. So what I told him was, if you want to put a few fish in there, spend a few $100, yep, you can do that. But then at some point, you're going to want to either renovate these smaller ponds and repair the dams or move away from them and build new ponds. Now, part of his deal is he wants to raise some cattle, so he's got to have water in the different pastures. So he's going to need ponds for water. So let's see here. Chris Blood, thanks for your endorsement, Bob. You bet. Heck yeah, you bet. Thanks for the wealth of information. You're welcome. Glad to do it. You bet. Dick Tabber's checking in. Mike Collins is checking in. So the second stop that I went last Friday was over near Clifton, Texas, which is west of Waco. And there's a fellow over there that I talked to about 2 years ago. And he had a good site to build about a 5 or 6 acre lake. So he got Mike Otto to come look at it, and then they started getting some earth movers over there to see if they could test the soils. And he didn't have enough clay in the basin of the lake. If they started building it, was going to be porous, which means it would leak. So what he decided to do was to cut the size down and line it with a rubber liner, a plastic liner. So over a span of time, they cleaned out a basin, built a dam, and it's all smooth. He's got a peninsula in there too, so they can enjoy the peninsula, be able to cast over the whole pond. It's about 2.5 acres now, and they lined it with a rubber lining. They put down a base, a felt base, and then put the liner on top of it, and then backfilled about 18 inches of dirt on top of it. There's a lot of deer in that part of the country, so they wanted 12 to 18 inches of dirt, 18 inches right along the edge, and then about a foot over the rest of it. So if a deer steps on it, it won't puncture the liner and cause a leak. And so his question to me was, he wants to put an aeration system in there. How should he design it? Where should he put it? And how many diffusers does he need? Followed by the question of, how many fish. So he wants to be able to catch a few fish in 3 or 4 years. So the advice I gave him was, why don't we stock it with the forage fish now as fingerlings, just small bluegills, small red ear, fathead minnows, give them about a 6-month head start, and then next fall we'll put some largemouth bass in it. And he was content with that. Happy to, he's going to buy a Texas Hunter feeder and start feeding MVP once we get the fish in it. So he's on board for a simple stocking plan. Let's see here. Let me see what Chuck Brinkman says, and we'll talk about what happened with Wayne and Josie. I threw out some Aquamax Sportfish largemouth on Monday, first time since November, and the bass acted like my kids on Christmas morning. Well, I've seen bass act like that. I've been feeding lightly through the winter with MVP and can't wait to see how they did over this winter. That's good. Report back. Chuck is just west of St. Louis, Missouri. He's a huge steward of his water and family. He's got his daughters. I remember he sent me a picture one time of one of his daughters dressed up. You know, they're young. I don't know, 9, 10, 11, something like that. And they'd gone out on a date with Dad, and they were all dressed up. She couldn't wait to get out of that vehicle and head to the pond and catch a giant catfish. And she had her Sunday go to school clothes, Sunday go to meeting clothes, and holding a big catfish in that picture. It was pretty cool. So then the third trip on Sunday, I went and met Wayne and Josie Lancaster, and they've got about a 4-acre pond. And I mean, they're sponges, man. They absorb. They're absorbing information. They're doing it right now with cocktails and snacks and texting each other, or maybe even talking on the phone. I don't know. So the first thing I noticed as I drove across the dam of their lake is their water looked spectacular. The water had a nice, healthy green tint to it. It had, and you could tell that there was a bloom going on, a very slight young plankton bloom because of the shade of green that their water is. That bloom couldn't have been more than a week or 10 days old and beginning to mature. Yeah, Josie said they're having margaritas. Of course they are. And so the first thing I saw was the water. I thought it looked really, really cool, and I thought it looked healthy. And I did notice that the lake had risen because you could see where cockleburrs had been flooded. They haven't owned this property but since November, so now they're in the learning stage. They've fished a little bit, but not much. They've caught a handful of bass. So the questions they have is they want to take that property and turn it into a source of enjoyment and a place to entertain children and veterans and some of Wayne's running buddies. I thought it was pretty cute. Wayne says, he said, for a long time I thought I wanted a man cave. He said, but I've got man land. And so Wayne's got man land, so he wants to fix it, where you can have a fire pit and kids can access it. They're even talking about a zip line now. We talked about a zip line, and ways to understand, ways to enjoy the place. But the beginning is to think about infrastructure. Where are people going to stay? What are they going to do? And then at the same time, what can you do to improve the pond? So Wayne knows the pond is lacking in habitat. He saw it when it was 4 feet lower back in November, and there's a long sandbar, like a channel, like a hump, a long hump, like one tooth of a comb, running parallel to the eastern shore. And so now that's covered up, and there's about 3 feet of water on top of it, and he knows that there's some fish around it. So what I was suggesting that they do is make a contour map of the bottom. He's got a little handheld depth finder, so he can climb in his brand new boat that Josie bought him last Thursday morning because the pond boss was coming, and go out and collect some depths and write them on a map, and then create a contour map. And with that contour map, you can figure out some of the best places to start improving habitat, like with the American fish tree, or building some brush piles. And so we spent a pretty good amount of time talking about habitat improvements, aquatic plant growth, water visibility. We talked about all those things. We talked about how to assess the fishery. So what we're going to set a date to electrofish, but in the meantime, Wayne and his buddies are going to see if they can't catch a few fish. They're going to target bluegills. They're going to target largemouth bass. They're going to target whatever they can catch. get some links and weights and start looking at the population dynamics and assessing and analyzing where the fishery is. So we're not too worried about water chemistry. The contour map will help them come up with a habitat plan to improve the habitat. They don't know how many spawning beds there are yet. Don't even know if they have any bluegill in there. They know they've got a few bass. They don't know what the different species are, and so the habitat plan, water is good, then is figure out what the fish are like, and then come up with a game plan to correctively stock, harvest, or manage the existing fishery and see what they can do with it. So I think that's kind of cool. And so we had a great visit, enjoyed the heck out of them. Josie sent some salsa and chips home for Debbie and I to enjoy. We shared in that. Well, so when I left Wayne and Josie's, I headed to Frisco, Texas. And I went to Dr. Pepper Ballpark and I watched a college baseball game. I watched my Aggies get beat by Illinois 1-0. For all y'all Illinois people out there, Fred Bingaman. So that was fun. Then I got a room, caught a 6:30 flight, and flew to upstate New York, connected up with my friend Bucky Lanehart, and I had a client with me. I invited a client to come up and see what was going on up there at Savannah Dude. Now this client, Freeman Sawyer, he watches this show from time to time. You're going to hear more about him as we go. Freeman just recently bought a ranch in East Texas. It's going to be called the Heroes Ranch. And his goal in life is to provide an opportunity for disabled veterans, public safety folks, firemen, police officers, Red Star, Gold Star families that don't get the chance to get outdoors and hunt and fish. He wants to provide them with that. He wants to provide them with that opportunity. So he and I teamed up and went up and toured Savannah Dude's area where they have some handicap accessible hunting land that Bucky developed years and years and years ago. And then we drove down to Carbondale, Pennsylvania, and toured Camp Freedom. Camp Freedom has been in existence 2 or 3 years, and that's what they do. They bring wounded warriors, disabled veterans out to be able to hunt and fish, and they have some day events, and we had an outstanding time listening to what goes on during their events. Well, I got a little tickle in my throat. Let's see here. Anyway, got home late Monday night after a rigorous few days roaming the countryside. Let's see, I just saw Bruce Condello's name up there. Hi, Bruce. Good to see you, man. Let's see here. Let me look here. Tate Smith. Okay, let's see. Mike Collins said, snared a beaver yesterday. If I had cut down a globe willow and a cypress tree, my wife... Oh, okay. It had cut down a globe willow and a cypress tree. My wife had planted 3 years earlier. She was not impressed. Well, when a beaver cuts down a tree, it's impressive to that beaver, especially when it looks like there's a sharpened number 12 pencil sticking up out of the ground, and the rest of the tree is gone. At Josie and Wayne's place, they had brought a Christmas tree out, laid it in the edge of the water to drag it out and turn it into fish habitat. And they've got like 5 beaver slides going over their dam, and there's a lake right below their lake where there's a beaver lodge. Well, when they told me that they'd laid a Christmas tree on the shore, the first thing I thought was, I bet they don't now. And then as we got out there and in the boat and looked around, it was over there. There's a piece of it over there, a piece over there, some over there. That beaver, or those beavers had gotten that Christmas tree and chewed it up. So with their habitat design, they got to be thoughtful about whether or not they want to use any trees or figure out how to manage the beavers. So there's Dick Tavert, hashtag Palm Boss Magazine. You guys know the drill. Another commercial. Heck, let's do this. Why not? $35 a year, folks, for Palm Boss Magazine. It's well worth it. You're going to take your honey out Friday night on a date, and you're going to spend more than the subscription for this magazine, and that date lasts till the end of the day, and this is going to last a year. And a number of the subscribers that I've talked to tell me that every issue of the magazine, they get several nuggets of information they can use. So I'm going to encourage you to go online, go to pondboss.com, which is a good resource anyway. There's Ask the Boss discussion forum. Of course, this Facebook page, we try to do the best we can to answer as many questions as we can when I got time, or if one of the girls has got time, we'll answer those questions. And there's all kinds of videos and all kinds of articles. Resource guide. The resource guide is probably one of the most valuable things in there other than the Ask the Boss forum. So at pondboss.com, a wealth of free information. But I do want you to splurge and spend $35 on a subscription to Pond Boss. Well, thank you for that. That's the economy that fuels things like this show. Okay, so let's see here. Let me see what else we got here. Tate Smith, I thought beaver and nutria in my 2 ponds all the time have cost me a lot of dollars. Yep, okay. Yep, fight, not thought. Okay, I fought beaver and nutria in my 2 ponds all the time. And they will. You know, beavers, the thing about beavers, since you guys brought up that topic, they typically will cut down trees like willows, softwoods typically. But when they run out of those, they'll start working on the hardwood trees and they'll girdle them. They will. I have seen oak trees, 40 and 50-year-old post oak trees that are about so big around, and a beaver has girdled it, chewed the bark all the way off, and then they can't chew into the wood because the wood's too hard, and the tree dies. You know, so that at that point you've got firewood. So when you're planting trees that you don't want beavers to cut, you need to wrap them in wire. Just get chicken wire, wrap them in wire higher than a beaver can stand, which is going to be about 30 inches. Unless you have a long-legged beaver, then it needs to be 35. 36. Wire comes in 36. Donald Rubbery says, I have a 2-year-old pond, 1 acre, filled with rainwater. Still muddy. Last week I put hybrid brim and fathead minnows. Was told to use hydrated lime. 100 pounds dissolved in water to clarify. What would you recommend? I would recommend you not use hydrated lime. Hydrated lime is really volatile and can spike your pH. Hydrated lime is calcium hydroxide. What you want is calcium carbonate, like ag lime. Ag lime doesn't work nearly as fast as alum does, but it's a lot less volatile. So steer clear of that hydrated lime. Don't use hydrated lime. Now, if you're going to go ahead and use hydrated lime, don't put it all in there at once. Put in a little bit, let the water adjust, put in a little bit more, but I wouldn't use it. Let's see here. Make sure I'm not missing anybody. Bear with me a minute. I see my sister Leanne checking in. Hello, sis. Good to see you, honey. Let's see. Ron says, Bob, is there any good way to use hydrated lime to clear water? No. Holy cow, you guys must be holding hands out there. Can't you use much less material with hydrated lime versus gypsum? Yeah, here's the deal on that, guys. Hydrated lime is calcium hydroxide. Gypsum is calcium sulfate. Ag lime is calcium carbonate. The calcium carbonate helps buffer the pond, and it can dissolve with enough of it if the water chemistry is such that it can cause those little colloidal clay particles to bunch up and get heavy enough that they sink. That's called flocculate. Look that one up after you've had a margarita. But I would not use that. I would not use hydrated lime. It's totally different chemical. Hydrated lime is notorious for shoving the pH up close to 10. That's enough to kill your fish. And hydrated lime just isn't the right choice. Don't use it. Now, that's out of this side of my mouth, and I'm going to talk out of this one. Ron is working to be in the pond management business. He's got some clients. So Ron, I'm going to tell you this as a pond pro. There's times that the limestone won't work to clear out muddy water. Neither will gypsum. And so your best choice at that point would be to use something like aluminum sulfate, alum, liquid alum. The problem with alum is when you put it in, you got to put it in slow enough that it doesn't cause the reaction I'm about to describe. Because what happens is when you put the aluminum sulfate in there, there's a chemical reaction that causes sulfuric acid to form with hydrogen ions in the water. So the aluminum is what causes the tiny particles of clay to cling together to get heavy enough to sink. So when you put enough alum in there to cause the mud to sink, if you put in a little bit more, you're going to send your pH plummeting. So the pH is going to go from 7 to maybe 4.5 in minutes if you overdo the aluminum sulfate. So what some pond management guys do, pond management companies do, is they keep hydrated lime with them, and when they get to that break point that the pond is settling out, they'll follow up with some hydrated lime to be sure that they don't send that pH down. The hydrated lime pH will send it up. Too much alum will send it down. So they try to bring it like that to balance it. But you got to know what you're doing. And if you're going to do it a little bit, practice. Practice on somebody else's pond with no fish. Hey, Dave Davidson, good to see you, man. Hey, Dave Davidson is one of our longtime friends. He's one of the moderators on the pondboss.com Ask the Boss website page. It's good stuff. I see Trey Bradley checking in. Good to see. Steve Lewis, our good friend we got to talk to Steve last week. Steve is fisheries biologist over in Arkansas, Hot Springs, Arkansas. Leanne's checking in. Good to see her. Shout out to our pond boss. Let's see what Bruce is saying here. It just went up. Shout out to our pond boss brethren in and around Nashville. Hope they're all safe. Absolutely. Tornado hit around Nashville, Tennessee. We have several pond boss brethren and family over in that part of the area. Heck, we haven't heard from Michael Gray. I haven't talked to him. I hope he's doing fine. I got a feeling he is. But we've got several pond boss extended family over in the Nashville area. Zach McKenzie, how established does your forage fish need to be to stock 2-pound bass in a new pond? Zach, I'm going to tell you, if those bass are not feed trained, you got to remember it takes 10 pounds of bait fish for a bass to gain 1 pound. So if you stock 2-pound bass into a new pond, you probably need enough forage fish to simulate a pond in its 4th year. So what that means is you need 5 size classes of bluegill, you need golden shiners, and I would stock no more than about 15, probably stock about 15 2-pound bass at the most, so they don't overeat that food chain. So you need bluegills that are 7 to 9 inches long. You need some that are 5 to 7 inches long. Those are big enough to escape being eaten by a 16-inch long bass, which is about 2 pounds, 15.5 to 16 inches long. So you need those bluegill that big. So those are your brood fish. They don't get eaten. They're the ones that can perpetually spawn, rolling spawns all year to provide the forage fish. Plus you need a bunch of younger size class, 3 to 5s, 2 to 3s, 1 to 3s. So stock a variety of sizes, and you need to have, I'm going to tell you, probably 200 adult bluegills per acre. You're probably going to need 1,000 3 to 5s, and I'd say 5 to 8,000 fingerling bluegills per acre of water if you want to have success with 2-pound bass. Now, if you don't have enough forage fish in there, the bass are going to, your forage fish is here, you stock your 2-pound bass, and they're automatically here. So they're going to be munching on this forage, and they're going to drop and wait, and so will your 2-pound bass. Whereas if you build your forage over 3 or 4 years and stock fingerling bass in the first year, it's going to take about 4 years to get here, and it's going to ebb and flow. So my point is don't sell yourself short on the bait fish. If you're going to put 2-pound bass in there, there's a couple of things going to happen. Those 2-pound bass grew up somewhere else, so there's no assurance that they're going to thrive in your lake, especially if they're not feed trained. If they're feed trained, I'm telling you something different. But if you're going to go catch some 2-pound bass, it would be smarter for the long-term benefit of your lake to stock it with fingerlings and let them grow up. Because I guarantee you, by the 3rd year, those young of the year bass will catch and pass those 2-pound bass that you stocked from another source without the gaps in the food chain. And there's going to be gaps in the food chain with 2-pound bass. So I'm not opposed to it as long as you don't mind money whipping that lake and adding some forage fish as needed to be sure that your 2-pound bass have what they need. And then once the 2-pound bass begin to reproduce, then you have a totally different equation that you're going to manage. So I'd be thinking about it. So let's see here. Mike Cottrell, can you buy sheetrock or where do you buy gypsum? I would not use sheetrock nowadays because there are additives to it, like fiberglass fibers, things like that added to sheetrock. Plus, it takes a while for sheetrock to dissolve in a pond. Plus, it's got paper on it. So you get a bunch of unnecessary stuff that inhibit the sheetrock dissolving into the water to do the job you're putting it in there for. Gypsum is where you find it. I mean, you can buy it in small bags in farm and ranch stores in areas that need gypsum for soil amendments. But there are gypsum mines. There's several out in West Texas. There's one west of Oklahoma City. That's where we get ours, and we usually buy it by the dump truck load. So let's see here. Roger B. Peterson, when I used alum, it dropped the pH, so I had to add a little hydrated lime. There you go. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Roger B. Peterson figured out how to do it right. There's Jacob West. Hey, Jacob, good to see you, man. Zach said I put 600 3 to 5 inch brim. That's not enough. I think with those 3 to 5 inch brim, if they're bluegills and you've already added 2-pound bass, you're behind the curve. I'd be feeding the heck out of those bluegills, especially now. I'd be getting them going. Jacob West, better late than never. Howdy, everybody. Good to see Jacob. Jacob, man, I love Jacob West. That guy, he's a stud. They've closed the valve on their lake. They got water coming in it. I can't wait to hear about that. Zach McKenzie, thanks for your time. Happy to do it, man. Jay Carroll, are golden shiners good for a pond? I thought they were nest robbers. They are nest robbers. I'll tell you where golden shiners are good for a pond. They're good for a pond that fluctuates, where the water level goes up and down. They can help stabilize the food chain in ponds that fluctuate. Other than that, golden shiners are predators limited by mouth size. I mean, a golden shiner 7 inches long has a small mouth, but you can bet it's going to eat baby fish all day long. Zooplankton, small insects, tiny fish, it's going to eat those. And golden shiners love to rob nests. Another thing about golden shiners that I don't like is by about their, at least by their 3rd year, they have an ovarian parasite that causes their reproductive capacity to drop measurably. So, one of the things about forage fish is you want them to be able to reproduce in your pond so you can have a perpetual food chain. So I tell people not to use golden shiners unless the pond fluctuates a lot or it's so overcrowded with bass that we've got to add something else because the bluegill can't keep up. And in that case, I'm not just adding golden shiners. We're going to use bluegill. We're going to use red ear sunfish. We'll use threadfin shad in some cases, especially in the south and southeast. In some cases, if there's quite a few bigger bass, we'll even use gizzard shad in special circumstances. I'm not telling you to go stock gizzard shad, but I do use them. And in some cases, it's a wise idea to use golden shiners in those circumstances. So bass crowded and waters that fluctuate, that's my opinion. Now, you go ask 9 more fisheries biologists, you're likely to get 9 different answers, and we're all going to be right with our circumstances. So Pierce Johnson's checking in. Good to see Pierce. Chad Bowman, lots of golden shiners and bullheads. Adding largemouth bass tomorrow to a 2nd-year pond. Attaboy. Rock and roll with it, man. Do it to it. Well, hey, we're knocking on the door at 7:30. We got 2 more minutes, so I want to encourage everybody, if you haven't subscribed to the magazine, please do that. It's $35 a year. And by the way, the Institute of Higher Pondology is coming up April 2, 3, 4. It's going to be at my house, and we'd love to have you. We got room for 3 more people. If you want to come, it's not cheap, but it's well worth it. If you want details, send me an email to info@pondboss.com, and I'll tell you all about it. I promise you, if you're serious about pond management, it would benefit you, and it would be money well spent to come do the Bob Lusk Institute of Higher Pondology. It's worth it. Plus, the food's good. So we're going to have a big time. Let's see, Lance Fredrickson, I got 1 minute. Thoughts on threadfin shad for a 1 to 1.5 acre pond? Already have fathead minnows, just wondering if some variety is good. A 1 to 1.5 acre pond, threadfins may make it, they may not. I typically like to put them in ponds 3 acres or bigger, but I'm not telling you not to. It's just don't expect to have good perpetual results from that. Harrison Davis, the best bass fishing pond I've ever fished had a hardy population of golden shiners. That's probably because the bass couldn't catch them and they were hungry. Trey Bradley, great education, thanks. Hey, you guys, you're welcome. Pond Boss Magazine, hashtag Pond Boss Magazine. Click like, share this video. I'd appreciate it. Subscribe to Pond Boss. And If you've got topics or questions, send them to me, and I'll do the best I can to answer them. The next issue of Pond Boss is going to be hitting the mail stream here pretty quick. And if you need some advice, I am available to help you with your ponds and lakes. So since I sold the pond management side of my business, that frees me up to do more consulting work. So if you need some one-on-one help, drop me a note and let's have a conversation. If I'm a good fit, we'll do it. If not, I'll refer you to somebody that is, because I know all about them. All right, adios. Stay. I need a drink of something. Adios. Glad you watched. We'll see you next Wednesday night.